Hi, welcome. I'm delighted to have the opportunity today to share with you some ideas from positive psychology, the scientific study of optimal human functioning, the science of happiness. I first started thinking about happiness when I was an undergraduate at Harvard. I was a computer science major, doing well academically, I was doing well socially, I was a varsity squash athlete, and I wasn't happy. And it didn't make sense to me because looking at my life from the outside, I should have been happy. Everything externally was going well, but internally it wasn't. I remember one day during my sophomore year waking up and walking straight to my academic advisor and telling him I'm switching my major. I switched from computer science to philosophy and psychology. I actually did become happier taking some of these classes and then went on to graduate studies in the area of positive psychology. And after completing my PhD, I wanted to share what I've learned with others. And that's when I started to teach. That first year when I taught, I had 8 students in my positive psychology class. 2 of them dropped out. The next year, through word of mouth, the class grew slightly and I had over 300 students. And then the third year I taught it, I had close to 900 students, making it at that point the largest course at Harvard. And at that point, the media became interested. Why? Because they wanted to understand how it is that there is a class that's larger than Introduction to Economics. Positive psychology is being taken up by hundreds of organizations globally. Why is it so popular? Because essentially for the first time we have a science of happiness. Until very recently, this whole realm of happiness, of well-being, has been dominated by the self-help movement. What do we have in the self-help movement? We have books, hundreds and thousands of books coming out each year. They're interesting, they're accessible. We have thousands of workshops being offered every week around the world. But many of these workshops, many of these books, not all, but many, lack substance, overpromise and underdeliver. On the other hand, we have academia. What do we have in academia? A lot of rigor, a lot of substance. Things are analyzed, reanalyzed, and meta-analyzed. Things that work, good stuff, but not accessible to most people. In fact, the head of my PhD program once estimated that the average academic journal article is read by 7 people. And that includes the author's mother. I say it in jest, but I'm an academic. I want that stuff to be read. Good stuff, important stuff. Not accessible. And this is where positive psychology comes in. Positive psychology explicitly tries to bring the rigor from academia and merge it with the accessibility of the self-help movement. And this explains its popularity. So what I want to do today is introduce you to the greatest hits of positive psychology. The first topic is what I've come to call the permission to be human. I was having lunch one day in Leverett House, one of the undergraduate dorms, when a student came over and asked, "Tal, may I join you?" And I said, "Sure, please sit down." Matt brought over his tray and said to me, "Tal, I hear you're teaching a class on happiness." I said, "Yes, I'm teaching a class on positive psychology." He said, "You know, my roommates are taking your class." There were 2 of the 6 students, so I had to be nice to him. So I said to him, "That's wonderful." And he said, "But you know, Tal, you've got to watch out now." And I said, "Why, Matt?" And he said, "Tal, you've got to be careful now." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because if I see you unhappy, I'll tell them." And I actually used that as a teaching opportunity the next day in class. And I told my students, the last thing in the world that I want you to think is that I experience this constant high, or that you, by the end of the semester or year, will experience this constant high. There are 2 kinds of people who don't experience painful emotions: disappointment or anger or envy or sadness. First, the psychopaths. The second group of people are dead. Exactly. So if you experience these painful emotions, it's actually a good sign. It means that you're not a psychopath and you're alive. And yet, in our culture today, we think, well, there must be something wrong with me, when in fact there is something wrong with us if we don't experience these emotions at times. The problem is that when we don't give ourselves the permission to be human, when we don't allow ourselves to experience the full myriad of human emotions, we're preventing ourselves from also experiencing the positive emotions. You see, all emotions flow through the same emotional pipeline. And when we block the flow of one set of emotions, we're inadvertently also blocking the other set of emotions, the positive ones. When we block the painful emotions, they simply intensify. As children, we give ourselves the permission to be human, but then we get to a certain age when the facade kicks in and when we say, okay, I can't show these emotions, it's something bad. We ignore it, we suppress it, and we pay a price. I want to show you a quick video clip of someone who gives himself the permission to be human.
עכשיו תבכה, עכשיו תבכה, כן, תבכה, עכשיו תבכה, עכשיו לצחוק.
Okay, so I'm not saying we need to look like this, but what I am saying is that we need a space, a place in our lives for unconditional acceptance, a place where we give ourselves the permission to be human. You know, the best advice that Tommy, my wife, and I got after having our first kid, David, was about 5 years ago, was from our pediatrician. He says to us, over the next few months, you're going to be experiencing every single kind of emotion to the extreme. You're going to experience extreme joy, bliss, and you're going to experience frustration and fatigue. It's normal, it's natural, we all go through it. So after about a month, I started to feel some envy toward David. Why? Because for the first time since Tommy and I had been together, here is someone who's getting more attention than I was, no matter how much I cried. But then 5 minutes later, I would experience this most intense love toward David. Now, normally I would say to myself, what a hypocrite. How is this possible? But because I had our pediatrician's voice in the back of my mind, giving me the permission to be human, I said to myself, oh, it's natural, it's normal. I experienced the emotion that I didn't like, and then was able to fully experience the wonderful emotion of intense love. You see, there is a paradox at play here. The paradox is that when we suppress these painful emotions, they intensify, they become stronger, they prevent us often from experiencing positive emotions. When we give ourselves the freedom to experience the full range of human emotions, we're being fully human. Let's do a quick experiment. So I'm a psychologist, I like doing experiments. This is an easy one, don't worry. For the next 10 seconds, do not think of a pink elephant. You know the one I'm talking about? You know, from Dumbo with the big ears? Do not think of a pink elephant. For the next 2 seconds, and I'm sure nobody thought of a pink elephant, right? Easy. Well, not really. Why? Because when we try to suppress a natural phenomenon, such as thinking about the word that we utter, the phenomenon intensifies. Same with painful emotions that are a natural phenomenon. When we try to suppress them, they just intensify. The paradox is, when we accept them, that's when they weaken. When I started to teach, the biggest challenge that I had to face was my introversion, the fact that I am shy, that I get very nervous standing in front of a large audience. And for me, a large audience is anything above 5. That first year when I taught the class was a real stretch for me, but I managed. And at the beginning, when I started to teach, I would give myself, positive mental attitude talk. Okay, Tal, you can do it. No anxiety today, no nervousness today. Come on, Tal. And what happened? Pink elephants all around. the anxiety, the nervousness just intensified. But after reading research by Harvard professor Daniel Wagner on ironic processing, or reading Viktor Frankl, the author of Man's Search for Meaning, on paradoxical intentions, and now, because I give myself the permission to be human, allow the anxiety and the nervousness to flow through me, it goes away after as little as 3 hours, which is why we're staying here till midnight. But no, it doesn't go away, but it's manageable. It's excitement now, as opposed to a debilitating form of anxiety. Imagine this. Imagine waking up every morning and saying to yourself, I refuse to accept the law of gravity. You know, this law of gravity, I've had enough of it. It would be so much nicer, so much more graceful to get up in the morning and just float to work, instead of walking down the stairs and then walking up the stairs, so clumsy. Imagine leading that kind of life, refusing to accept the law of gravity. Well, for one, you may not survive for long if you truly refuse to accept the fact that things, people being no exception, fall when left in midair. But even if you did survive, what kind of life would you lead? A life of constant frustration. Instead, what do we do with the law of gravity? We accept it. We may not like it, but we accept it. More than that, we even create games around the law of gravity. Imagine the Olympics without the law of gravity. Imagine a baseball game without the law of gravity. Meaningless. So we play with it. Not so for painful emotions. Painful emotions are as much part of human nature as the law of gravity is part of physical nature. And yet, we accept the latter and reject the former. And we pay a very high price for it. When I talk about unconditional acceptance, when I talk about the permission to be human, I'm not talking about passive resignation. I'm not talking about saying, okay, so I'm jealous or I'm anxious and there's nothing I can or want to do about it. Rather, what I'm talking about is active acceptance. Accepting the painful emotion and then choosing the most appropriate course of action. There's nothing wrong with feeling envy. There may be something wrong with my behavior following on that envy. There's nothing wrong with feeling fear, nothing cowardly about it. In fact, courage is not about not having fear. Courage is about having fear and then going ahead anyway. When we suppress these emotions, they control us. And if I don't accept that I sometimes get angry or am sometimes envious, I begin to see envy and anger all around, even though it is not there. And here is the question that we need to ask ourselves. Do we give ourselves and others, whether it's our children, whether it's our colleagues, whether it's our friends, our partners, do we give ourselves and others the permission to be human? This, to my mind, is the foundation, the most important pillar of a happy, fulfilling life.